WHGE 95.3 FM coming up, the Open Eye.
Those of us that indulge in or commit intellectual violence don't do so for the pleasure of mental masturbation or ego diddling. We do so because the chains of oppression on our people's minds are deep and difficult to remove.
Hey, Sherry, I see you. Good morning, my children of the sun. Welcome to the Open Eye on WHGE 95.3 FM. I'm your host, Third Eye Optometrist, Patrice Gibbs. Welcome to the show. I'm here to get that eye open, and as we always say, every generation has its purpose. Ours is to reveal the truth and reverse the brainwashing, and we do that right here on the Open Eye. Let me get my disclaimer out the way right quick, and we'll keep it moving. All right.
The views and opinions expressed on the Open Eye are those of the hosts, guests, and contributors, and do not reflect the policy or position of WHGE 95.3 FM nor our sponsor, the Delaware Center for Homeless Vets. Any content provided by Open Eye's hosts or contributors are theirs and are not intended to malign any religion, ethnic group, company, or individual.
All right. Let's get him started here. Yes, indeed, I brought my laser surgery equipment today. I sure did. Listen, today I want to begin with a simple observation. History rarely announces itself while it's happening. People living through great turning points usually don't know they are living through them. The people who witnessed the fall of Reconstruction, they didn't know they were watching the birth of Jim Crow. The people who watched the slow dismantling of voting rights in the early 20th century did not realize they were watching democracy shrink before their eyes. They simply woke up one day and discovered rights they thought that were permanent had vanished. This is why vigilance matters. Across this nation, battles are raging over voting rights, representation, redistricting, public education, civil rights enforcement. And who gets a voice in the future of America? Recent court decisions and legislative actions have intensified efforts to redraw districts and reduce the political influence of black communities in several states, primarily the Confederate states. I'll stop calling them Southern states. They're Confederate. The Confederate that was never punished. Civil rights advocates warn that protections won through generations of struggle are being weakened or dismantled. The lesson of history is not that freedom disappears overnight. The lesson is that freedom is usually chipped away piece by piece, one policy, one law, one court ruling, one act of public indifference at a time. That's why the Open Eye exists. Not to tell you what to think, not to make you comfortable, but to encourage you to pay attention. Because a sleeping people can be ruled. A distracted people can be manipulated. A frightened people can be controlled. But an informed people are dangerous to those who depend upon ignorance. So today, as always, we will examine the headlines, challenge assumptions, question narratives, and separate facts from propaganda. Open your mind, sharpen your vision, and keep your eyes fixed on the focus shaping your future. Children of the sun, the hour is late. The stakes are high, and the truth remains our most powerful weapon. Welcome to the Open Eye. All right. Hey, cuz, I see you there. All right. What's up, Steve? All right. Good morning, y'all. Let's keep it moving. All right. WHGE 95.3 FM, the Open Eye. And as you always know, any Open Eye listener knows, I use history to teach you what's going on. Now listen, we know the stereotypes. Now I gotta ask you about something. Who was Mammy on the plantation? What were the dynamics of her relationship with the enslaver? Sometimes Mammy may have raised and breastfed her enslaver. That's real crazy. Yeah. Oh, what's going on there? Okay. At some point, Mammy was a young woman and the object of the enslaver's sexual abuse. That's why she had a level of authority on the plantation. Understand that. Sometimes Mammy was a villain. Yeah. Informing on other slaves, thwarting runaways. And sometimes Mammy was a saint. Seeing the hungry got fed. Writing out passes for runaways, preventing whippings, keeping families together, using her influence to even stop slaves from being sold off. Okay, we're going to explore this seldom talked about figure on the plantation known as Mammy. Because the question is not really who was Mammy, but how did she get to become Mammy? See, the figure of Mammy is one of the most misunderstood and mythologized people in the history of American slavery. The first thing to understand is that Mammy was not a single type of person. She was a role. And like all roles created under slavery, it was shaped by violence, coercion, survival, personality, opportunity, and circumstance. Because she had the popular image of large, dark-skinned, asexual black woman who loved the white family more than her own children. That was largely a post-slavery invention. It was propaganda. It helped justify slavery by portraying enslaved women as happy servants who were willingly devoted to white households. Yeah, because their reality is far more complicated. How did a black woman become Mammy? And Mammy was usually an older enslaved woman assigned to the enslaver's household. She often supervised cooking, child care, laundry, sewing, and the daily management of the big house. But she didn't start there. She was once a young enslaved girl. Before becoming Mammy, she may have been a field hand, a domestic servant, a cook, a nursemaid, a seamstress, and a victim of sexual exploitation. Many women who later became household authorities spent decades proving their usefulness to the enslaver. Age mattered. Experience mattered. Trust of the enslaver mattered. And yes, proximity to power mattered. A Mammy might spend 30 or 40 years inside a white household before achieving her position. Let me tell you about one of the most disturbing realities. Is that Mammy had nursed white children. Some had their own babies taken from them so they could breastfeed the enslaver's infant. Imagine the psychological violence. Your child cries from hunger while you're ordered to feed someone else's child. And that happened throughout the South. Many white children developed profound emotional attachments to the black woman who raised them. Some love Mammy more than they love their own mothers. Yeah, that's true. Yet those same children grew up to own slaves. That contradiction lies at the heart of slavery. Was Mammy ever the enslaver's sexual victim? Absolutely. The plantation system was saturated with sexual violence. Many women who later became trusted household servants had earlier been sexually exploited by enslavers, overseers, and the enslaver's sons. But let me say this. Not every Mammy experienced that. Okay? But enough did that historians recognize sexual exploitation as a common feature of plantation life. Ironically, some women became Mammy after they were no longer viewed as sexual targets because of age. See, and that's why they had that authority. Because in the enslaver's mind, that was their lover. Had nothing to do with love, had everything to do with power. The stereotype of Mammy is old, heavy, and asexual, partly developed because white society wanted to erase the sexual abuse of enslaved black women. If Mammy was imagined as everyone's grandmother, people didn't have to confront the fact that she may have once been prey. So why did Mammy have authority? Well, because every plantation required intermediaries. Excuse me. No plantation owner could personally manage hundreds of enslaved people. So entrusted enslaved people were given limited authority. Mammy occupied a unique position. She often had direct access to the enslaver, the enslaver's wife, household records, food supplies, and most importantly, information. Because she knew secrets. She knew who was sick. She knew who was pregnant. She knew who was planning marriages. She knew which children belonged to whom. Knowledge is power, even under slavery. I mentioned Mammy was a villain. Could Mammy be a villain? Certainly. Some Mammy figures became enforcers of plantation discipline. They informed on runaways, they reported resistance, and they discouraged rebellion. They protected their privileged position. Human beings responded differently to oppression. Some resist, some collaborate. Most, they do a little of both. The same woman who secretly fed hungry children might also report a runaway as she believed it would bring collective punishment upon everyone else. History is rarely clean. Now, could Mammy be a hero? Absolutely. And many of them weren't. Because Mammy often had access to resources nobody else had. She could hide food, delay punishments, intercede with the enslaver, keep families together, protect children, secure medicine, pass information, help arrange escapes. Former enslaved people left accounts describing women who used their influence to stop beatings and sales. Others secretly taught reading. Others forged travel passes. Others acted as intelligence networks. Some became the unofficial diplomats of the plantation. Let me tell you about the tightrope Mammy walked. The tightrope Mammy walked. All right? The real Mammy lived in a dangerous middle ground. Field slaves might distrust her. The enslaver never fully trusted her. The enslaver's wife resented her influence. But the enslaver's children might adore her. She belonged everywhere and nowhere. She lived in the house but owned nothing. And she exercised authority with no freedom. She could influence power but never actually possess it. The great tragedy of Mammy. Mammy may be the plantation figure who best reveals slavery's psychological complexity, because she was often mother and servant, protector and prisoner, insider and outsider, resistor and collaborator, victim and survivor. The stereotype erased all these complexities. The real Mammy was not a smiling caricature holding biscuits. She was often an aging black woman carrying decades of grief, secrets, compromises, sacrifices, and impossible choices. To understand Mammy is to understand that slavery was not simply a system of chains and whips. It was also a system that forced people to negotiate power, affection, survival, and resistance inside a world designed to deny their humanity. That's why the historical Mammy remains such a fascinating figure. She stood at the crossroads of the plantation's most intimate relationships, between enslaved and enslaver, mother and child, loyalty and resistance, power and powerlessness. Few people on the plantation saw more, knew more, and carried a heavier burden. The reality of Mammy. WHGE 95.3 FM. This is The Open Eye. Hey, Brother Jafar. See you there. All right. Children of the sun. Let me tell you something. Naomi Osaka owes nobody an apology. Just like black people, we don't owe nobody an apology. If anything, we owe somebody an ass whooping. Tennis player Naomi Osaka, tennis champion, hosted what she called a Black AF dinner. You know what AF stands for, right? It's during the French Open. Along with Taylor Townsend, she brought together black tennis players from around the world. Players like Coco Gauff, Gael Monfils, Chris Eubanks, Asia Muhammad, and others. And predictably, some people got upset. The same people who never questioned country club dinners, alumni gatherings, legacy networking events, or exclusive social circles suddenly became deeply concerned when black people gathered together. Naomi's response, it was simple and powerful. She said, excuse me, I grew up watching my dad get discriminated against, having the cops call him on multiple times at the called on him multiple times at the tennis court. There are multiple things I will apologize for in my life, but celebrating being black and appreciating who we are will never be something I will consider saying sorry for. Right on, sister. Damn right. What many people fail to understand is that tennis has never been a welcoming space for black athletes. Long before Naomi Osaka arrived, before Coco Gauff became a star, before Taylor Townsend fought her way into the sport, there were two young sisters from Compton who endured levels of hostility that would have broken most people. You know who I'm talking about, Venus and Serena. And they didn't merely compete against opponents, they competed against an entire culture that often resented their presence. Venus and Serena Williams were mocked for their hair, their bodies, their clothing, their confidence, their father, their neighborhood, and even their success. Crowds openly rooted against them. So-called Americans would root for the French or the South African if they were white and playing against the Williams sisters. Commentators questioned their illegitimacy. Opponents made remarks that crossed the line from competition into outright racial hostility. The most famous example, or infamous example, came at the 2001 tournament at Indian Wells Tennis Garden. After false rumors spread that the Williams family had manipulated tournament results, Serena was booed relentlessly by thousands of spectators. Her father, Richard Williams, later described hearing racist slurs from the audience. Serena would boycott the tournament for 14 years. Imagine that. The greatest women's tennis player in history was driven away from one of the sport's premier events because the atmosphere became so racially hostile. Yet despite all that, the Williams sisters transformed tennis forever. Today, when Naomi Osaka, Coco Gauff, Frances Tiafoe, Taylor Townsend, Chris Eubanks, and countless others step into a professional court, they do so walking through a door that Venus and Serena kicked open. That's why gatherings like Naomi's dinner matter. They're not about exclusion, they're about affirmation. They are about young black athletes entering spaces where they may still be one of only a handful of people who look like them, and discovering that they are not alone. Every group understands the importance of community. Every group understands the value of mentorship. Every group understands the comfort of being among people who share similar experiences. But somehow when black people do it, it becomes controversial. No. What Naomi Osaka organized was not segregation, it was solidarity. Not division, community. Not hatred, recognition. The real question is not why black tennis players wanted to spend an evening together. The real question is why that bothers anyone at all. There's nothing radical about celebrating your heritage, honoring your journey, and supporting those who share your struggle. There's nothing racist about creating a space where people who have endured similar obstacles can encourage one another. Hell no. Naomi Osaka owes nobody an apology. Neither did Serena. Neither did Venus. And neither should any black person who takes pride in who they are. This is Open Eye. Had to make sure I had the mic off because I got to say something right quick before I go back on the air to the public. You and on Facebook, you get to hear me say it straight out. Fuck Kevin Hart, son of a bitch. Anyway, don't you never compare Richard Pryor to Kevin Hart. Let's stop tippy-toeing around. Kevin Hart didn't just miss the moment, he abandoned it. There's a canyon-wide difference between being a black comedian who is famous and a black comedian who is conscious. And Kevin Hart planted himself on the wrong side of that divide. Richard Pryor wasn't just telling jokes. I consider Bicentennial Nigger, I'm going to say it straight out, that's the name of the album. I consider Bicentennial Nigger one of his greatest works. Because he was teaching. He was documenting America in real time. He was translating pain, racism, hypocrisy, and political insanity into comedy that cut like a blade but healed like medicine. He never had to throw black people under the bus to get a laugh because he actually respected the people he came from. Richard Pryor punched up. Kevin Hart punches sideways. And in this era, that's not disappointing, it's embarrassing. Look around the world we're living in. Black history is being erased with a smile. Gerrymandering is happening in broad daylight. Racist rhetoric is back like it never left. Books are being banned like we're in a dictatorship. Black officials are being targeted and pushed out. Old racist imagery is creeping back into the mainstream like a bad sequel nobody asked for. That is the most explosive era for political and cultural comedy since the 1960s. Right now, this is. And instead of rising to the moment, Kevin Hart slid into the safest lane possible. He let black men, black women, and black culture become the easy punchline while the real power structures sat untouched, unchallenged, unbothered. That's not comedy with courage. That's comedy with corporate approval. Richard Pryor risks his career every time he opened his mouth. Kevin Hart risks nothing because he says nothing. And here's the part that stings. When you refuse to challenge power, you end up entertaining it. When you refuse to confront the system, you end up performing for it. When you refuse to speak truth, you end up selling silence. Some comedians use comedy to shake the table. Others use comedy to keep their seat at it. Richard Pryor left scorch marks on the culture. Yeah, he did. Kevin Hart needs brand partnerships. And that's the tragedy. Not because Kevin Hart isn't talented, but because he chose comfort over consciousness. He chose applause over awareness. He chose the room over the truth. Comedy without consciousness isn't commentary. It isn't legacy. It isn't impact. Comedy without consciousness is just entertainment. And entertainment without courage is forgettable. You effing coward. This is The Open Eye. I'm Patrice Gibbs. WHGE 95.3 FM. This is The Open Eye on the Advocacy Education Station. Yeah, you tune in here, you're gonna get an education. When Trump took office, the orange disaster, old poopy pants, when he took office in this latest fiasco of an election for presidency to sit in the White House, people got up and said, we need to protest. We need to use our voices out here on the street. Excuse me. And what did black people say? We already told you. People with a platform like myself, we told you stay your black ass home. And what was the reaction? You heard this before, haven't you? Listen, first they came for the socialists, and they did not speak out because I was not a socialist. Then they came for the trade unionists, and I did not speak out because I was not a trade unionist. Then they came for the Jews, and I did not speak out because I was not a Jew. Then they came for me, and there was no one left to speak for me. That's why Pastor Martin Niemöller, German. First they came as poetic form of 1946 post-war confessional prose by German Lutheran pastor Martin Niemöller. It indirectly condemns complicity of German intellectuals and clergy following the Nazi rise to power and subsequent and mental purging of their chosen targets. And this is being posted in and on black people's social media by white liberals and other non-blacks because black people have declared we will not participate in their protests against the present regime. First of all, this poem is not relevant to black people. Second, where were these white people when black people were being brutalized, murdered, and oppressed? We told you what these neo-Nazis or the Trump regime were about and what they would do, and were ignored. Now that what we warned you about has come to reality, you have the audacity to come for us. Yeah. Let me tell you about the weaponization of complicity and why Niemöller's, I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing his name right, but why his stanza fails black America. The deployment of Pastor Martin Niemöller's First They Came on black social media isn't just a historical mismatch. It's a profound act of gaslighting. When white liberals and non-black so-called allies post this poem, they guilt black people into joining protests against a hostile regime. They are offering a lesson in solidarity. They are revealing their own historical amnesia. Niemöller's prose was a confession of a belated awakening. To weaponize it against a population that has been awake, resisting, and dying on the front lines of American oppression for over 400 years is the height of audacity. It's a historical inversion. You're not Niemöller, and we were never safe. The core flaw in applying this poem to black Americans is the assumption that black people ever had the luxury of standing by. The poem's premise assumes a default state of safety. The narrator only faces danger at the very end because they chose silence during the targeting of marginalized groups. The black reality. There was no first they came for black Americans. They came for black people first, second, and continuously. From chattel slavery to Jim Crow, from redlining to war on drugs and rampant police brutality, state-sanctioned violence has been a foundational reality, not a sudden political shift. To suggest black people are playing the role of the silent, complacent bystander ignores the fact that the house has been on fire for generations. Black people didn't stay silent because they weren't the target. They survived precisely because they spoke out when no one else would listen. The audacity of using this poem to chastise black communities raises a glaring, uncomfortable question. Where was this urgency when the targets were exclusively black? I have to catch myself. This is the kind of stuff make you cuss your ass out. For decades, black communities warned the broader public about the systemic rot in law enforcement, the erosion of voting rights, and the rise of a distinct, aggressive brand of American neo-fascism. Those warnings were routinely dismissed as exaggerations, identity politics, or partisan paranoia. When black people were brutalized or are brutalized, murdered, and oppressed, the response from mainstream white America has historically ranged from active participation to comfortable silence, where at best symbolic gestures like lawn signs and hashtags, unaccompanied by systemic sacrifice. But now the political climate has shifted, and the present regime threatens the comfort, rights, and institutions that white liberals hold dear. See, the script and flip. Suddenly, indifference is a sin. Suddenly, everyone needs to lock arms. The audacity to have to try to promote a guilt trip, to demand that black people drop everything to anchor a movement they did not start for a system that has rarely protected them in exploitation of black labor. For generations, black voters, particularly black women, have been treated as the institutional firewall for democracy. They are expected to vote in blocks, march in the streets, and absorb the heaviest blows of political retaliation to save a country that routinely defaults schedules their rights for later. Attempting to shame black people into protesting by implying their current refusal makes them complicit in their own future demise is a twisted irony. It's just the blame of a collapsing democracy onto the victim of that democracy's historic failures. Let me give you the reality check here. The use of first they came in this context isn't an invitation to solidarity. It's a temper tantrum born of newly discovered vulnerability. If white liberals are terrified of what the current regime is capable of, that terror is valid. But they do not get to project that panic on the black people as a moral failing. Do not look at a community that's been fighting a multi-century war for basic humanity and ask why they are enthusiastic about fighting your backyard fire. Before trying to drop poetic guilt trips on black social media, white America needs to answer a much harder question. When they came for black people, where the hell were you? This is the open eye. Fuck out of here. WHGE 95.3 FM. This is the Open Eye. All right. You know, they didn't stop the hate. Oh yeah, I hear people tell it, you know, racism is not as bad as it used to be. I mean, look at the numbers. Nah, they didn't stop the hate. They stopped counting it. You think we crazy? Hate crimes against melanated people have risen by more than 80% over the last decade. Let that sink in. Not 8%, not 18%, more than 80%. Now, if you were serious about protecting people, what would you do? You would strengthen enforcement. You would increase investigations. You would hire more staff. You would improve reporting systems. But that's not what happened. Instead, the people in power found another solution: gut the very officers responsible for documenting and investigating discrimination. Consider the facts. Black Americans have been the #1 target of race-based hate crimes every single year since these statistics have been tracked. Every year, not sometimes, not occasionally, every goddamn year. More than half of all race-based hate crimes in America are directed at black people. And according to federal data, 2024 was the second worst year on record since hate crime reporting began in 1991. So what was the response? The Department of Education's Office for Civil Rights, the agency responsible for investigating discrimination complaints in school, was gutted. 7 of 12 regional offices were eliminated. Half the staff disappeared. More than 25,000 complaints now sit in a backlog waiting for action. And when investigators did review complaints, the Government Accountability Office found that more than 90% were dismissed. Think about that. Imagine calling 911 and being told your call has been placed behind 25,000 others. Imagine reporting discrimination, harassment, or violence and learning there's a 9 in 10 chance your complaint will be thrown away. That's not protection, that's abandonment. And it gets worse. Some states still do not even have hate crime statutes on the books. States like Indiana, Mississippi, South Carolina either lack comprehensive protections or have glaring gaps in enforcement. Across much of the country, reporting remains inconsistent, voluntary, or incomplete. In other words, we have entire jurisdictions where crimes may occur, but no one is required to count them or document them. Now ask yourself, what happens when fewer crimes are recorded? Politicians point to declining reports and declare victory. Look, the numbers are going down. But the numbers are not going down because the hate is disappearing. The numbers are going down because people have learned that reporting often leads nowhere. No investigation, no accountability, no justice, no reason to believe the system cares. And there's a name for this. Psychologists call it institutional betrayal. When the very institutions that claim to protect you instead deepen the harm. Sociologists call it manufactured ignorance, making a problem disappear on paper while it continues to grow in reality. Yeah, black people seen this movie before. For generations, sheriffs refused to record racial terror. Lynchings disappeared from official records. Assaults went undocumented. Intimidation was treated as normal. The crime was committed twice, once against the victim and against history itself. The sheriff who refused to write it down in 1925 has been replaced by a bureaucracy that often doesn't require it in 2025. Different century, same result. If you stop counting the wounded, you can claim the battlefield is peaceful. If you stop investigating discrimination, you can claim discrimination is declining. If you erase the evidence, you can manufacture innocence. If reality does not care what the spreadsheet says, the harm continues, the victims remain, the fear remains, and the receipts remain. Let me tell you something. Whenever those in power become more interested in hiding the problem than solving it, understand that the problem is larger than they are willing to admit. Because class isn't dismissed when the paperwork disappears. Class is dismissed when the truth becomes too dangerous to record. I'm Patrice Gibbs. This is The Open Eye. WHGE 95.3 FM. This is The Open Eye. All right. You know, all you do is complain. We don't talk about no solutions. Really bad. Yeah. BS. That's all black people do. Why don't you pull yourself up by your bootstraps? We ain't got no boots. Shit. The work is happening. It always has. My children are the sun. Every now and then something happens that reminds you that history is not a museum. It's not a dusty archive. It's not a story frozen in time. History is alive. History is moving. History is repeating, and sometimes history is correcting itself. And this week, the Los Angeles Times wrote about something that proves it. A group of black farmers, black entrepreneurs, black chefs, and black organizers came together and built the Crenshaw Food Hub. Yeah. A community-owned space where fresh produce comes straight from black-owned farms, where hot meals are cooked by black culinary artists, and where the dollar circulates among the people it's meant to serve. Now, some folks said they didn't know. They didn't know black men were doing this. They didn't know black men were building institutions. They didn't know black men were feeding communities. But let me tell you something. If you don't know, it's because you're not looking. Because this is not new. It's not an anomaly. This is a continuation. When I look at the Crenshaw Food Hub, I see echoes of Fannie Lou Hamer's Freedom Farm Cooperative in the 1960s. Black people pooling land, pooling money, pooling courage to feed themselves when the system refused to. I see the spirit of Booker T. Washington and George Washington Carver at Tuskegee teaching agriculture not as a job, but as a pathway to independence. I see the blueprint of Black Wall Street in Tulsa, where black farmers supply black grocers who supply black restaurants, who supply black households, a full economic ecosystem built from the soil up. Yeah. I see the legacy of the Nation of Islam as far as the 1970s, where black men and women cultivated thousands of acres to feed their own communities. I see the memory of the Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters who taught young men the power of discipline, trade, and collective action. I see the same heartbeat that pulsed through the Great Migration when black families carried seeds, literal and metaphorical, from the South to every corner of this country. So no, this is not new. This is tradition, y'all. And let's transition back to the present. Now, in 2026, the Crenshaw Food Hub is carrying that tradition forward. Because the Boys to Men Hood Foundation and Flag Universe stepped in and said, let's make this a classroom. Let's make this a pipeline. Let's make this a place where young boys can see black men being useful, being skilled, being organized, being present. These boys are learning agriculture. They're learning culinary arts. They're learning trade and commerce. They're learning cooperation, the most endangered skill in our community. They're learning that you don't have to wait for a system to save you when you can build your own. And yet some people still say, black men don't want anything. Black men aren't doing anything. Black men don't care. But the truth is simple. If you don't think black men are out here building, it's because you're not out here. You're not in the gardens. You're not in the kitchens. You're not in the planning meetings. You're not in the spaces where black men are quietly, consistently constructing the future. Because the work is happening. The builders are building. The seeds are being planted literally and figuratively. And just like our ancestors, these men are not waiting for applause. They are not waiting for permission. They are not waiting for validation. They don't need your validation. They're doing what black men have always done when the world isn't watching. They're feeding the people, they're teaching the youth, they're building institutions, and they're shaping tomorrow. And that scares the hell out of them. And the next time someone tells you what black men aren't doing, remind them history doesn't stop. It just changes locations. From Tuskegee to Tulsa, from Freedom Farms to Crenshaw, from the past to the present, black men are still building, black men are still creating, black men are still rising up. And if you can't see it, it's because you ain't looking with an open eye. Black power, baby. WHGE 95.3 FM. The Open Eye. Okay. Let me tell you about rage bait, racism, and the dangerous game of provocation. All right. A disturbing trend has emerged in the age of social media. There are individuals who have discovered that racism is profitable. Not profitable because it solves anything, not profitable because it teaches anything, profitable because outrage generates clicks. Clicks generate views, and views generate money. So some online personalities have built entire platforms around confrontation. They walk into communities they know they are not welcoming. They insult people, they provoke people, they target black people. They film themselves doing it. Then they upload the footage and collect the revenue. The formula is simple. Disrespect somebody, trigger reaction, and then play the victim. But there's a problem with this business model. Human beings are not props. The people being harassed are not actors reading from a script. They are fathers, mothers, workers, students, veterans, and ordinary citizens trying to go about their day. When you deliberately provoke people for entertainment, eventually you will encounter someone who refuses to participate in your little social media production. The internet has created a generation of people who confuse attention with power. They believe followers are the same thing as respect. They believe going viral is the same thing as being important. They believe that because a camera is recording, the laws or cause and effect has somehow been suspended. They have not. Every action has consequences. FAFO. When someone repeatedly antagonizes strangers, especially through racial insults and harassment, they're gambling. They are betting that the people they target will absorb the humiliation and simply walk away. They are betting that nobody will defend themselves. They are betting that reality will continue to operate according to the algorithm. Reality don't give a damn about the algorithm. And when those bets fail, suddenly the conversation changes. Suddenly the same people who celebrated provocation begin demanding sympathy. Suddenly the people who encourage conflict begin preaching peace. Suddenly the aggressor becomes the victim. That double standard reveals something deeper about America. Too often, America is less concerned about racism than it is about being accused of racism. Black suffering becomes a debate. Black grievances become an argument. Black experiences become something to be fact-checked, challenged, minimized, and explained away. But let someone feel uncomfortable because racism has been identified and suddenly we're told there's an emergency. Suddenly everybody wants civility. Suddenly everybody wants healing. Where is that urgency when black communities face discrimination? Where is that urgency when black citizens are denied opportunities? Where is that urgency when black neighborhoods are underfunded, over-policed, or politically marginalized? The truth is that many people are perfectly comfortable with injustice as long as they don't have to hear about it. The greater offense in their eyes is not racism itself. The greater offense is naming it. And that is why these provocateurs find an audience. They understand that there is a market for racial antagonism. They understand that there are people who will reward cruelty as long as it is packaged as entertainment. They understand that there are viewers who don't want solutions, they want spectacle. But eventually, spectacle collides with reality. Eventually, somebody's get hurt. Eventually, somebody's life is changed forever. Eventually, somebody discovers that clicks and followers are poor substitutes for wisdom and common goddamn sense. Oh, my children of the sun, we should reject violence whenever possible. We should reject hatred whenever possible. We should also reject the cynical business model that profits from provoking human beings for sport. Racism is not a game. Human dignity is not content. And treating people like targets for engagement metrics is a dangerous path that ends exactly where common sense would predict it would end. Yeah. Stay vigilant. Stay informed. Stay woke. When does violence isn't the answer apply? One of the most curious phrases in political discourse is violence isn't the answer. Not because the statement is necessarily wrong, but because of when it suddenly appears. It's remarkable how often those words are directed at the oppressed when they resist, that are rarely directed at those who created the conditions that produced the resistance in the first place. When people are trapped in poverty, where entire neighborhoods are stripped of opportunity, that's violence. When workers are exploited while a handful accumulate unimaginable wealth, that's violence. When citizens are denied equal access to education, housing, health care, voting rights, or justice under the law, that's violence. When a government uses its power to repress, surveil, intimidate, or silence dissent, that's violence. Not all violence arrives with a shotgun. Not all violence leaves blood on the pavement. Some violence is economic. Some is political. Some is institutional. Some is so old and so common that society stops recognizing it as violence at all. That is often the greatest trick of power, convincing people that violence only exists when the oppressed finally react to it. History is filled with examples. The powerful rarely condemn the violence that maintains an unjust order with the same passion they condemn the violence that challenges it. Oh, they grow comfortable with the daily injuries inflicted upon the vulnerable. When those injuries produce anger, rebellion, unrest, or resistance, suddenly the language of peace appears. Suddenly we hear calls for calm. Suddenly we hear demands for civility. Suddenly we hear lectures about order. But where were those calls when the conditions producing the anger were being created? Where was the urgency for peace when families were being dispossessed, communities marginalized, workers exploited, or citizens denied their basic rights? Peace is a noble principle. Nonviolence is a powerful principle. But peace cannot simply mean the absence of resistance. Peace must also mean the absence of oppression. Because there's a profound difference between peace and quiet. A prison can be quiet. A dictatorship can be quiet. A plantation can be quiet. The graveyard is quiet. Quiet alone is not justice. If violence truly is not the answer, then the principle must apply equally to everyone. And must apply not only to the desperate act of resistance, but also to the policies, systems, and institutions that inflict suffering in the first place. A society cannot credibly condemn the violence of the oppressed while excusing the violence of oppression. The demand for nonviolence carries moral weight only when it is directed at both sides of the equation. Otherwise, it becomes less a call for peace and more the demand for submission. And history teaches us a difficult lesson. People can endure injustice for a very long time. But when a society normalizes exploitation, discrimination, exclusion, and repression, it should not be surprised when those pressures eventually produce resistance. The real question is not why people resist. The real question is why so many ignore the violence that made resistance inevitable. Remember this. Justice is not merely the absence of conflict. Justice is the presence of fairness, dignity, and equal protection under the law. Until we confront the violence embedded in oppression itself, lectures about peace will always sound quite incomplete. I'm Patrice Gibbs. This is The Open Eye. We are a people you could not break, that possess a morality you cannot fathom. What people fail to understand, what America refuses to understand, is that considering everything black people have endured on this soil, it is by the grace of the Creator that we are not a vengeful, blood-seeking people. That is not weakness. That's not fear. That's not powerlessness. That is moral discipline forged under centuries of fire. But here's the tragedy. Some of you are so primitive in your thinking, so underdeveloped in your understanding of humanity, that you generally believe the only reason black people didn't rise up in violent retribution is because you had the power and we don't. You think restraint is the same thing as fear. You think mercy is the same thing as submission. You think dignity is the same thing as defeat. And that reveals more about you than it ever could about us. Because you simply cannot fathom a people choosing peace when they have every historical justification for rage. You cannot comprehend a people choosing morality when immorality has been their daily inheritance. You cannot imagine compassion from those who have received so little of it. And you cannot process the ideal that a people brutalized a generation might still choose to be humane. You can't comprehend that because you project your own nature onto everyone else. You assume that if the roles were reversed, if you had endured the chains, the whips, the lynch mobs, the massacres, the redlining, the police killings, the stolen wealth, the stolen land, the stolen futures, you assume you would burn the world down. You assume you would repay cruelty with cruelty. You assume you would do to others what was done to you. And that's the difference. Black people in America have carried centuries of trauma without becoming the monsters this country once insisted we were. We have carried centuries of injustice without turning into caricatures used to justify the injustice. We have carried centuries of state violence without becoming a nation of retaliatory killers. That is not because we are powerless. It's because we are powerful in a way you do not understand. Our restraint is not fear, it's sovereignty. Our mercy is not weakness, it's spiritual maturity. Our dignity is not passivity, it's ancestral discipline. And the fact that you cannot imagine a people choosing morality over vengeance says nothing about us. It exposes you. It exposes the smallness of your imagination. It exposes the poverty of your ethics. It exposes the limits of your humanity. Because some of us know a truth you still can't grasp. Power is not proven by how much you harm, by how much you can inflict. Power is proven by how much harm you refuse to inflict, even when history said you'd be justified. That's the grace we walk with. That is the strength you mistake for fear. And that is the moral high ground you will never be able to comprehend. I'm Patrice Gibbs. This is The Open Eye. WHGE 95.3 FM, the Education Advocacy Station. My children of the sun, as we close today's broadcast, remember something important. Every generation is tested, not by what it claims to believe, but what it is willing to defend. It is easy to praise courage when it belongs to someone else. It's easy to celebrate the heroes of yesterday. It's easy to quote Malcolm and Martin. Harriet and Garvey, Ida B. Wells, and Fannie Lou Hamer, and all the giants who came before us. The difficult question is, what are we doing with the inheritance they left behind? Because freedom is not a trophy that one generation wins and then places on a shelf forever. Freedom is a garden. If not cultivated, weeds take over. If not protected, it's stolen. If not valued, it disappears. The powerful understand this. That is why they fight so hard for influence, for institutions, for narratives, for legislation, for courts, and for public opinion. They know that the future belongs to those who show up. The question is whether or not we know it. So leave this broadcast with your eyes open. Question what you're told. Verify what you hear. Read more than headlines. Think deeper than slogans. And never surrender your ability to reason. Because once the people stop thinking for themselves, somebody else starts thinking for them. The struggle continues. The work continues. And the responsibility belongs to all of us. Remain vigilant, remain informed, remain dangerous to ignorance, and above all, remain woke. All right? I hope you learned something today, because I learned something before I got here. Yeah. And as we always tell you, destiny determines who enters your life, but you decide who stays. Therefore, value those who value you, and don't treat those as a priority. You treat you as an option. This is The Open Eye on WHGE 95.3 FM. I'm Patrice Gibbs. Thanks for joining us. Peace. All right, y'all, off the air. That's where moving right along, and don't think I forgot. Oh, no. It's always there. Global African supremacy.